mountaineering and outdoor sports world, and it's the three types of fun. Some say there's only two, but I like the version that's three. And so here you can see the three types of fun. So type one fun is just fun. It's like something you do it and you're like, wow, that was just really fun. We had a great time. We went out. We went bowling with our friends, and it was just great. Everybody had a great time. But the outdoor people don't like stopping on type one fun because they've invented type two fun. And so type two fun, if you can think about someone climbing a mountain, it's this kind of fun that it's just really not fun to do. It's hard, it's raining, you're wet, your feet hurt. It's just, you just have to kind of grit it out. The people that, complete the Appalachian Trail, solo hiking, same thing. It's this idea that the fun, the pleasure, let's say, is about thinking about it later, right? It's about thinking like, wow, like I did it. I climbed the mountain. I gritted it out. I suffered through that really, hard rainstorm to reach my accomplishment. So that's type two fun. But what I think is even more amusing is this idea of the extreme sports people of type three fun. It's not fun to plan it. It's not fun to do it. And it's not even fun to think back on it. And it's really these people that like basically survive a catastrophe. They survive an avalanche during a mountaineering expedition, or they're sailing boat. They're trying to sail across the Atlantic Ocean, and they spend a month on a desert island. The whole idea of it is like, ironically, it's like, oh gosh, I'd never do that again. But of course they will. Now, why do I show you this type 1, type 2, and type 3 fun? Again, fun that is play, that is fun to plan, fun to do, and fun afterwards. Type 2 fun, fun to plan, not fun to do, but fun after. And type 3 fun, not fun to plan, not fun to do, not fun after, but somehow comprehensively felt worthwhile. It's this idea that we play for reasons that aren't just, oh, it gets my heart rate up and I feel good. It can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's really important that we continue to think about the idea that play can be hard. And I think it was someone mentioned in the Reactor to the Past, the student said, this is the hardest fun I've ever had, right? There really is something about that engagement in play can produce something else that's not directly hedonic. It's not just pleasure and pain. There's something else, and I'm going to get to that something else. And there's a quick reference I wanted to bring up, Bernard Suit's classic work on play, The Grasshopper. And the grasshopper it's a philosophical analogy, but it's the grasshopper and the ants. And the grasshopper fiddled through the summer, and then the ants are there at the end, and the grasshopper's freezing to death, and the ants invite the grasshopper in. Well, in Suit's retelling of it, the ants invite the grasshopper in, and the grasshopper says, "Nah, I'd rather just freeze to death out in the elements, because I didn't play to avoid work. I played because it's a higher purpose, and I am happy. I am happy that I chose my life of play rather than work." And Suits goes through and defines a game as something that's essentially accomplishing a goal through less efficient means. Again, if you think about it, I know I'm kind of muddying games and play, but of course we play games. Suits really had this really wonderful recognition that we make our life harder in order to play. So he would say, if you really want to play golf, the easiest way to accomplish the goal of getting the ball in the hole is to pick it up and walk to the hole and drop it in. He said, that's no fun. So we make it harder by saying, why don't we make it really complicated by whacking at the ball with a stick? So even in Suit's kind of notion of games is this idea that we want to make it less hard to make it more fun. And the reason that I say play is not entirely hedonic is because obviously there are tons and tons of good, positive, healthy, pleasant things that come out of play. So sometimes maybe we do play because it's hedonic. But I don't think we should start there. I don't think that we should bring play into the classroom because it's pleasurable. I think we should bring play into the classroom for other reasons, which I will get to. So, with all that said, I got to get to this important kind of point of view. And if you haven't read Sutton Smith's Ambiguity of Play, it's the single best summative literature review of play that I know of. And Sutton Smith was a incredibly well known and deep thinker about education. And he wrote this book The Ambiguity of Play. And if you haven't read the book, just really quickly, what he argues in it is he said that the play itself is kind of hard to pin down, and there are a lot of, and because of that, there are a lot of different, what he called rhetorics of play. So people would view play as instrumental in different ways. So he would say, some people think that play is progress, like, oh, children play to learn. Some people would say play is fate, the roll of the dice. Some people are winners and some people are losers. He would say play is power, the NFL, my team's better than your team. It demonstrates some sort of fitness. Play is identity, again, sports, my team won, I'm a Broncos fan, or, whatever. Play is imaginary, what we tend to think of as child's play, that, it's about this fantasy, and, sometimes, as Sutton Smith would say, the phantasmagoria of children's play, which is really dark play, but it's really that, play is to allow us in some sort of Aristotelian way, have a catharsis of experience. Play is a sort of form of self-discovery, and of course, the big one that we find in higher art all the time is like, oh, no, you can't play. Play is frivolous. I don't really mean to try to tell you the story of Sutton Smith's book for any other reason than to point out that one of the difficulties we have in our classrooms and in the academy in general talking about play is the nature of play itself is very ambiguous. It's open-ended, and I'm going to talk more about that. But that you're going to find that you're going to have to actually almost redefine what you mean by play when you talk to different people. So if you're selling a play to your department chair, you might have to talk about play as progress. If you're talking to somebody else, you might talk about the joyful, imaginative kind of qualities of play, how it allows people to take on more risk. You might talk about play as power if you're trying to accomplish some broader goal. I'm not trying to guide you, just to sort of say, because play is ambiguous, we're always going to have to be engaged in a conversation about the what is play, the meaning of play, and the purposes of play. And that's really important as you think about play in the academy, because it's not us versus them as much as it's trying to reframe the rhetorics. Ironically, after Sutton Smith titling his book The Ambiguity of Play and talking all of this, his final chapter in the book is he says, actually, the purpose of play is that it drives adaptation in the organism, and so it's an essential part of evolution. I always thought that was funny. So play is ambiguous, and it's a really important concept that again, just to kind of take a moment and reiterate, these concepts aren't at odds with each other, they just interlock in different ways. But I think sometimes it's really important, for example, to remember that there's not a clear-cut definition of play, that you're always in negotiation about what play is. All right. This sits somewhat in the center of my thesis here, in part because this is the center of my scholarship. And some years ago, my friend John Sharp and I, John's an art historian and a game designer and a design teacher at Parsons. I'm myself professor of fun, professor of play. We wrote this book called Fun, Taste, and Games, and I won't belabor you with the overall thesis of the book, but the core of the book really was to argue that the reason we play games is to encounter what we would have called the aesthetic of fun. Or put in really plain language, we play games to have fun. Or, to this talk, really simply, we play in the pursuit of fun. So, if play is the action, right? If play is what we do, that's the activity in pursuit of something, what is that activity in pursuit of? Well, in our research, we came to the conclusion that we have a perfectly good word in the English language, and that word is fun. And fun actually is a shorthand way of describing an aesthetic place that we get to where all these benefits of play happen. So when I get into this a little further, I'll come back to fun. But John and I have tried to honor what fun is in order to say, let's say play is the activity and fun is the aesthetic experience, and now let's actually dig in and ask, what is fun? How do we make fun? How do we structure fun? How do we design for fun? How do we protect fun? How do we facilitate fun? How do we promote fun? And so fun has become a really important word for me, and I use fun and games very much interchangeably because I think we play to have fun, and I think that fun, fun's primary mechanism for coming into being is what we call play. But you don't have to take, my word from it from my writing. I wanted to bring in this wonderful scholar of play. Bernie passed about 6, 7 years ago, but he wrote a bunch of books, and this one is one of my favorites, The Playful Path. And this book, you can find it for free on Play Story Press. It's a wonderful book. You should read it, and it's full of insight and joy, written in a very plain way. But this is just one of the endless quotes I could have pulled out of Bernie's book. But I like the way he talks about fun, because you can get away from David and John's very academic view of fun and just look at Bernie's view of fun. And Bernie says, fun is wherever you are, in whatever you are doing or sensing or thinking. It's between you and the person you're with, or the machine you're using, or the table you're sitting at, or the path you're walking down, or the things that you and yourself are pretending into being. It's not something to strive for, but something to melt into, to sink into, to open up to. So when David says, fun is the aesthetic of play, you can go, okay, what are you talking about? Bernie just says it in plain language. Fun is that electricity, that thing that we call engagement, that thing that we call connection, that thing that we call joy and wonder and surprise and excitement and hope. All that stuff, the biochemistry that we often explain of all the wonderful cocktail of neurotransmitters that fire off when we're having fun. Bernie's just describing it. He's just like saying it's a state of being, which is actually a way of thinking about or talking about the idea of what fun is. So I bring this concept to you because it's an important concept that I come back to over and over again, which is, here's play, but broken play isn't fun, right? It answers this sort of weird central question that people always had, is like, is Russian roulette playful? Well, it's a game, right? It's got all the structures of a game. It's got rules, it's got consequences, it's got a win condition. It's not fun, right? And so that's the answer. The answer is, the structure of play only makes sense when it's fun. This has a huge implication for something like the concept of gamification. Gamification was overbroad because it said anything that you attach game elements to can be fun, and in experience we're like, nah, that's not right. So sometimes you can apply game stuff to things and it's fun, but sometimes it's just a dumb idea. And the answer was always just like, we never evaluated the experience. Was the experience playful? Was the experience fun? Was the playfulness expressed in this description that Bernie has? So if you can kind of buy that this is like this important concept, and by the way, part of the reason why I'm showing you all these book covers is because if there's something here that tickles you or frustrates you, you can go read what some of these original thinkers had to say and decide for yourself, because most of all, I want that to be my message, which is like, hey, play with this. So if we play to have fun, and fun is this amazing kind of experience that just makes us, strive and makes us tackle type 3 fun and drives us, and we pursue it and it surrounds us. What's the value of fun in a certain sense? Or what's the value of play? And there's many different values of play, but I think the one that's absolutely the most important, and certainly the most important in the world of teaching, is that this idea that true play, and what fun is really about, is it creates this space in the universe for the player to make their own meaning. So if you just say that play makes meaning, or play is a place for meaning making, that should excite you as a teacher, because you're like, yeah, I'm in the business of meaning making, I'm in the business of curiosity, I'm in the business of helping structure stuff so that students become interested and start to make their own understanding and their own meaning. So what do you mean, David? What do you mean play makes meaning? Well, let me give you a bit of a detour into a really important essay written by Gregory Bateson, and it's published in this book, Steps to the Ecology of Mind. But he wrote an essay called The Origins of Play and Fantasy. And the short version of what Bateson was doing is at the time he was interested in this question of whether or not animals have metacommunication. So you're like, where are you going with this? It sounds like we're not talking about play. I promise we'll get there. Bateson wonders, do animals have metacommunication? Well, what's metacommunication? Metacommunication is communication about communication. So it's the whole thing, if you go home to your partner and you say, do you like my outfit? And they say, oh yeah, it looks great. And you're like, wait, you don't like my outfit? That's humans, we do it all the time. We use one set of words to mean one thing while we contradict it with another kind of tone or meaning. So he just wondered, do animals have metacommunication? So, because he was a classic scholar, he left his office that day and he walked down to the San Francisco Zoo and he sat down in front of the monkey cage to figure out if he could just see if animals had metacommunication. And what he noticed right away is the monkeys are gambling in the enclosure, and they're fighting, but they're not fighting. They're playing, but he can see that they're playing, but they're fighting. They're tackling each other and they're biting, but they're not biting hard. They're just biting a little bit. And he's like, oh my gosh, animals have metacommunication. These monkeys are saying, hey, pretend I am biting you with this bite that's not a real bite, but act like I really bit you so we can play fight, but I didn't really bite you, so let's not get too serious about this. And he was like, score, animals have metacommunication. But just as quickly he realized, wait a minute, this is the source of fantasy and play, right? And this is a really fascinating concept that he kind of called shorthand, the bite that is not a bite, right? And in John and I's book, we expand the bite is not a bite just to call it what is not. This weird state in play where both what is true and what is not true both exist at the same time. Now, I'll give you a really very quick example. It's like, if you see kids and they're playing dress up, right? They're dressed up as an astronaut. And they've got something on their head, and they got a one-piece suit on. Now they know they're not an astronaut, right? But they ask of the space, of their friends, of their parents, to act as if they are an astronaut. This is also seen in if a kid gets a little stove like mom and dad, or a little lawnmower like mom and dad, they don't want a real stove or a real lawnmower. They want one that's like that. They want a stove that's not a stove, or a lawnmower that's not a lawnmower. What they want is that space between the real thing and the fake thing so they can make their own meaning. And if this doesn't sound global enough, I study architecture as kind of my primary object, and I love Disneyland. And Disneyland is a place where, there's castles that aren't castles, and mountains that aren't mountains, and rivers that aren't rivers. There's a mouse that's not a mouse. He lives in a house that's not a house. And people that despise Disney will say, I don't like Disney, it's fake. And people that love Disney are like, I know it's fake, that's why I like it, but it's real, it's there, I've been there, I can touch it. And so Bateson really started to describe.
You're expressing a real world appreciation.
I'm sorry, my phone started talking to me. Bateson started to describe this very interesting philosophical place where the player in fantasy is basically presented between the real and the not real. And if you need another example, think about everything you heard from Reacting to the Past. We're bringing students into this place where they act like they really are in the Revolutionary War, or they're back in ancient Greece. They know that they're not, but they kind of continue to do this world building and sort of testing between the real and the unreal, between the is and the is not. In that space, which John and I call the aesthetic of fun, or fun, is really the heart of play. And as long as you maintain that state of play, as long as you maintain that fun, as long as you have that space, people can make meaning. Now, I've said a lot about this particular topic because this is absolutely central to why play is so essential to teaching. Yes, it increases engagement. Yes, it increases connection. Yes, people like it. But really at the heart of it, as an educational tool, it puts students in the place where they start to make meaning. And I think if you reflect on your most successful, playful pedagogy, you'll realize that's what happened. All right, And just to say it wasn't just Bateson's idea, D.W. Winnicott, a very famous psychologist who studied early childhood, I mean, he has this quote, he has a whole book about it, but it is in playing, and only in playing, that the individual child or adult is able to be creative. What he's talking about is our ability to actually make meaning comes from play. Okay, it gets a little easier from here. Just to kind of get on the other side of the hill with some other things I think that are important. Because play makes meaning, it threatens the orthodoxy, right? And I know Allison talked about Miguel Sicard's Play Matters. It's a great book about play and ethics. And I love this kind of summary quote. Play is a dance between creation and destruction, between creativity and nihilism. Play is always on the verge of destruction, of itself, of its players, and that is precisely why it matters. Play is a moment between order and chaos. This is why we connect play so closely to the jester, right? The one character in the royal court who's allowed to speak truth to power because it's play. This is why playfulness can feel so destructive. It's one of the reasons why we have feared play in the classroom, because most of us were brought up in a world of hierarchy, of the professor over the student, of received knowledge, of don't give the students too much power, they'll run rampant, don't let the inmates run the asylum. But play in and of itself turns over hierarchies. It questions the gaps and the seams. It is destructive. It is creative destruction in and of itself. And I love, again, listening to the Reacting to the Past folks talk about when things break down, the word was, it's a teachable moment, absolutely. Because this is the point where the chaos is reigning, and you have to ask, well, how do we collectively make meaning and move forward? So I think you always have to remember, some people resist play absolutely 100% on purpose because they do not want you to threaten power. And play always threatens power. All right. Now, this one I love, and it's an important one, which is just to remember that because of all these other things, we play with play. In Colloy's Man Playing Games, great sociological study of how we play, he has this really interesting part I've always loved. He says the cheater doesn't destroy the game. The cheater doesn't destroy the play. And I know we all go like, well, wait a minute, people that cheat, they're ruining the system. He says, no, the cheater respects the game. They respect the play. They're trying to win by any means necessary. He says the person that actually ruins the game is the spoil sport. The person that says, I'm not gonna play. The card cheat at poker is still playing the game. They're just playing with play. And to put that into really stark context, there's this wonderful book here. You can get this one's also free online, on Bullock and Lamoe's Metagaming. And basically, the entire thesis of the book and the examples is that, and they were talking more about games, but they were saying, we have all these formal systems for play, they said, but what's really interesting is how people play with play. Now, you know, one wonderful example from the history of video games is one of the early first-person shooter 3D games was this space game called Quake, where you're a space marine and you'd run through these 3D levels and you'd shoot space aliens. Well, early on, some of the players in the game figured out that you could jump in this game, but you couldn't jump very high, so there were these ledges and stuff where the enemies could come out and shoot you from above, but you couldn't get up there. Well, some players realized that if you took your rocket launcher and you aimed it at the ground while you were running and jumped and hit the rocket launcher at the same time, the game's physics would lift you up to levels where the game developers never had any idea you could get. And so it was quote-unquote cheating. Well, now, you know, 30, 40 years later, the rocket jump's just a part of kind of gaming vocabulary. But it started out with players playing with the game, right? You see this in football. Fans of football history will remember John Madden's Fumblerooski, which they actually outlawed. You'll see it in children's play where they're playing with, I shot you. No, I'm made of metal. I shoot you with lava bullets. You know, I get ice. You know, they're playing with play. Well, we're going to see it in our students who said, well, you said in the syllabus, and you know, we look at it as they're trying to get away with something, but really they're playing with play. So again, I want to remind everyone that just because we set up structures and rules and we say, here's how the play should be conducted, players play at and with play. And in fact, That's what I'm inviting you to do with this talk. Rather than me giving you some sort of systematic analysis of play, I'm throwing out all these ideas that I think are important, asking you to juggle them, to discard them, to throw them back at me, to play with these ideas. I'm trying to give you, in a sense, some conceptual Lego blocks that you can build whatever you want. But always remember, to play is to be at play because it's an action. It's not, you can't solidify play. All right, we got a couple more. This comes out of the work that Lisa Forbes and I did. Lisa is my co-founder of Professors of Play, and you'll find this idea inside of the Professors of Play books that we've produced. And by the way, these are also all available online for free. But it's just this idea that when we think about the object of play, I think our initial thought is that we play with people, which is true. I think sometimes we think a lot we play with things, like we play with Legos, or we play with model trains, or we play with golf balls. But we also think we play with ideas, which is, when we think about the world of teaching, is so important, is that playing with others and playing with things is really two legs of the stool. The third leg of the stool is playing with ideas. If you're doing a Sudoku puzzle, you're kind of playing with a thing, but you're really playing with ideas. Back again to reacting to the past. I mean, a lot of you are asking the students to play with ideas. It helps that you're assigning other people roles, so they're playing with each other. It helps that you give them costumes so that they can kind of play the role and play with their hat or play with their props. But remember, play is playing with ideas, and this is also why there are so many really wonderful play structures where people don't play with each other, they don't play with things, but they are playing with ideas. And if you don't think that's true, anyone in here who's ever written an academic paper knows the best, most fun part, whether it's pleasurable or not, is you're sitting in front of your computer with all your resources and it finally clicks and you start to play with the ideas and you put them together and you get excited because you figured something out. And I would just say that's just Winnicott's creation. It's just a playfulness that's implicit in play. All right, two more. This one is the one that I stuck in because I was listening to everything and I just realized this is one of those weird turns. And remember, Allison mentioned that we code play in different names. Improvisation is one of those names. Stefan Nekomanovich is a really amazing improvisational violinist. And this book is great. In fact, this book was given to me by someone who taught in our Department of Ed. And it's really great. Now, he's talking mostly about music. He's talking mostly about improvisation in music. But he also talks about it more broadly. And this is one of the best books I've ever read about teaching, which barely talks about education at all, because Nekomanovich makes the important point that all play is improvisational. Why is all play improvisational? He doesn't say it, but I'll say it. It's because at the heart of play is meaning making. And you can't play something systematically or methodically. That's not play. That's like cooking the recipe. Play is always, well, what if I do this? What if I do that? Oh, happy accident. How can we pivot past this? What happens next? Oh no, we didn't anticipate that. The rules broke down. Do we keep playing? How do we fix this? And at the same time, he's a musician, so he understands the importance of skill, right? And as instructors, as teachers, we always come into this where students want to play, but we also have to give them the skills to play. If you want to play soccer, you got to be able to kick a ball. If you want to play ice hockey, you better be able to skate. And as you get better at it, then the playfulness emerges. So I picked this quote to tell you, you can read Nekomanovich and actually transform your teaching, but you have to do the translational work in your own mind. Because like he says this about improvisation. One of the many catch-22s in the business of creativity is that you can't express inspiration without skill. But if you're too wrapped up in the professionalism of skill, you obviate the surrender to accident that is essential to inspiration. For every one of us that has been forced into the position of teaching content that is essentially drill and practice, the obsession with skill, recognize the inherent wisdom in this quote. Because we need to educate skill so that students can play with it. But what we need to not do is forget to let them play with the skills that we're helping them master. So love this book, one of my favorite books, eminently readable. It takes a long time to read because every 2 or 3 pages you have to put it down and be like, wow, that's good. All right, one more, and then I'd love to hear some feedback and some thoughts and some play. Oh, no, I guess I got two more, but these will go quick. This is back to Hunziker on Homo Ludens. It's a book that you should read if you're interested in play. Hunziker basically just says that play is this underlying force that drove culture. And one of his examples would be like, why do judges wear robes, or in the UK, why do they wear wigs? He's like, it's because they're costumes. It's because it comes out of, carnival and playfulness and sat outsideness. And I put Law and Order here. I'm like, why is Law and Order such a popular television show? Because essentially, it's about the game of Law and Order. It's about detective work, about solving mysteries. It's about the dynamic, narrative argumentation and outcomes of a courtroom. And Hunziker would be like, yeah, it's because it's all play. I bring this to you as teachers to remember that we would say teaching and higher education is a culture forming force. I would say without play, it is a weak sauce culture forming force. It doesn't even understand its own basis in play. Much to be said about that, but that's Professors at Play, where we're trying to revolutionize higher education through play. Finally, one more, I just wanted to stick this one in here. I think it's super important. A lot of times I think that we think of play as a privilege. Play is what you do after the work is done. I think we think of play as a privilege. I've heard this a lot from disadvantaged groups. Easy for you to say, old white guy, you can teach in your class. You're not in you're not in these categories of oppression. People would say, play is a privilege. It's not afforded to me. And I disagree 100%. I think some types of play are privileged. I think snow skiing, if you live in Nebraska, is a little bit of it's a disadvantage. You got to travel pretty far. I think if you're a poor kid in Colorado, you're still not privileged to play. But play itself isn't privileged. Play itself is open for anyone, anywhere. And one of the most powerful examples of this that I know of, and this is a great book of you could read. This man, Werner Reich, he was 16 years old. He was actually 15 years old when he was put in the concentration camps. He was 16 when he was shipped to Auschwitz. The only reason he probably survived the camps is he was just young. He said he passed muster or review by Joseph Mengele 3 different times. But this transformational thing happened to him when he was in the camps. He climbed onto his bunk the first day at Auschwitz, and there was a man named Herbert Levine, the great Novelli. He'd been a very famous magician in Berlin, who was also interned. And Novelli showed Werner a card trick. And Novelli had been allowed to keep cards because he entertained the guards. So then he showed Werner how the card trick was done. Werner says he thought about that card trick through the rest of his internment in the concentration camps. And he finally was liberated. He got out of communist Yugoslavia, moved to the United States, became a pretty famous magician, and performed a lot talking about the concentration camps. But he would tell you that the playfulness of that card trick was a part of his lifeline that kept him, alive through the concentration camps. And I would say if you can find play in a concentration camp, play is not privilege. Play is inherent, it's human, and it's always available to us. It's just a matter of what type. Interestingly enough, Novelli also survived the concentration camps, although the two men didn't actually realize they both had survived until Novelli had passed. So there you go, a whole bunch of propositions from the research, things I think that we should remember about play that I think will help guide us in our understanding of play and our promotion of play, and absolutely in our design and integration of play into our classroom. And I've left a whole 5 minutes for reactions and questions.